the checks and where the balance is. My mom did not leave one authoritarian regime just to have her daughter and her granddaughter grow up under another one.
Hello, welcome to RVA Magazine. I'm Sofia Feliciano, your media producer and also your host of today's episode. Similarly to a lot of people my age, I want to be more informed about what's going on, to have conviction in my own beliefs and feel like my voice matters outside of my own thoughts. But all of that was just a lead up for our guest for today, the Democratic candidate for Virginia's 1st District, Lisa Vedernikova Khanna. Lisa's story is deeply tied to the American dream. Her mother fled from Soviet Russia, escaping authoritarianism, and Lisa has fought and worked for practically everything that she has for herself today. She's built a massive career in media, tech fields, and now, just at 30 years old, she is running for Congress. She's running because she believes the American dream shouldn't be a relic of the past. So while you listen, I want you to think, what is my American dream? And is it around me right now? Is it around me? Is there anything I can do to put it where I want it to be? Let us know. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me. You know, I'm running for Congress in Virginia 1, which is the suburbs of Richmond, going over to the Eastern Shore against Republican Rob Wittman, who's been in office for 20 years. And something, you know, that really drives me to run is my personal lived experience. So I grew up with a mom who came to America from Soviet Russia in 1991, just before the fall. And my mom raised me on her own as a housekeeper and a nanny. I actually cleaned houses with my mom at a very early age. So some of my earliest memories are starting to work with my mom cleaning houses. And by the time I was in my very early teens, I was working multiple jobs at a time, including doing really glamorous things like slicing meat at a gas station deli. So we do it all around here. So some of my earliest memories are about working and just this like work ethic that my mom instilled in me because she had no other choice and because we just had to put one foot in front of the other one. And it wasn't even something that we thought about that deeply. It was just something that we needed to do. So working is a very early memory of mine. And then, you know, my mom did the best that she could, but we went through difficult things that many people go through. We were evicted when I was 5. I remember, you know, being evicted in the middle of a snowstorm when I was 5. That's an early memory. English is my second language, but English is definitely my mom's second language. So I think a lot of first gen kids can relate to needing to fill out forms for your parents. And for me, you know, that applied to bankruptcy forms just as much as any other form that I've had to fill out for my mom over the years. And I really view my life path here in America as just a real testament of what this country can do at its best. I really feel like I forged a path in this country, largely thanks to things like public schools. I'm exclusively, up until college, a product of public schools. That's how I learned English when I was 6, and Medicaid is how I had my insurance as a kid, and free lunch programs is how I had meals as a kid, and ultimately Pell Grants allowed me to go to college and build a really successful career for myself. I started my career working on campaigns while I was still in college. I worked full time. I was then the chief of staff at the New York Times and the chief of staff at the DNC during the 2022 midterms, and then ultimately worked at a tech company, all while being really involved here in Virginia, including serving on my local CASA board and being the 2-term president of the Metro Richmond area Young Democrat. So everything that this country has given me, I've been able to really use as an opportunity, and it's been an investment in me. And I just really am focused on how our government should be making people's lives better, whatever better means to them, including easier. And I find that, unfortunately, a lot of members of Congress, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, are now very used to getting elected and sitting there for a really long time and finding ways for the office to benefit them. And they forget to actually serve the people that they're supposed to represent. So
more on this country being able to give you the American dream. Your campaign speaks very powerfully to the American dream. Can you kind of define what the American dream is in like maybe non-specifics of like just what it can be for somebody, and if it's tied to your mother's immigration from the Soviet Union.
I think anyone in this country should be able to have the American dream, whether your ancestors have been here for tons of generations or whether you're first generation like me. But to me, what the American dream is the government that the American taxpayer pays for coalescing to make people's lives easier and to make people's lives better. And the way that is the American dream to me is because we have one of the richest countries in the world that should really be focused on helping the people in this country who pay for it have easier, better lives. And I think that is what the purpose of the American dream as a symbol is. It's the notion that you work hard, you do everything as right as you can, and then you get something out of it. I think people are working hard. I think people are doing things right, and I think they're no longer getting something out of it. And the government is who should be providing that something. And right now, that is just not what we're seeing. But that is what the American dream at a broad level is to me.
And you've talked about your policy plan, which focuses on the working families, and including the paid leave and affordable childcare. And also what I resonate with most that I think is not mentioned is just how you talk about caring about women's health and doing things for these minorities is just advocating for a functional economy. And I feel like our current majority rules often leaves this minority completely unsupported. And so I just wanted to hear more about how investments in these things can impact the long-term growth of our country.
Totally, yeah. So for my policy plan in general, I think about it in 3 buckets. So the first bucket is accessibility, the second bucket is affordability, and the third bucket is accountability. So, when I talk about accessibility, what I'm really focused on is healthcare. And we have just a dire situation with healthcare in this country, especially on the heels of the big, beautiful bill vote, which Rob Wittman, of course, supported, which cut just a massive amount of money to the social safety net programs that a lot of people rely on, including Medicaid and Medicare. And a lot of this district, a lot of the suburbs of Richmond, a lot of the Eastern Shore do rely on Medicaid in particular. And so I think about accessibility to healthcare as something that affects anyone at any age, whether you're a child, whether you're a pregnant woman like myself, I'm 6 months pregnant, whether you are elderly, whether you are healthy, right? And so for me, in the healthcare bucket and the accessibility bucket, it's focused on how do we make something like insulin cap out at $35 a month? How do we push insurers to cover fertility treatments for parents who are trying to start a family, right? The right talks a lot about being pro-family, but then they don't actually do anything to help families start or have an easier life here. How do we actually support rural healthcare, which is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. For example, there is a rural hospital here in the district that is very much at risk of closure because of the big, beautiful bill cuts. And, that's horrible for a bunch of reasons, including the fact that it's hard to retire in a place without a hospital or medical care because you're not going to go to the doctor. It's hard to have a child in a place where there is no health care because you can't drive an hour to the doctor. It's hard to own a house and try to sell it because nobody wants to sell a home without any medical care around it. That just affects property values. It affects job loss, right? So rural healthcare and expanding rural healthcare and providing telehealth is really important to me. 7 out of 18 of the localities in the district, which is almost 50%, are in maternity care deserts because they're in rural healthcare areas. So that's something that's really important to me in that bucket. And, then there's the component of course, restoring Roe versus Wade and really fighting against national abortion bans and just making sure that people have the accessibility to starting a family how they want to start it with the resources that they want to start it with. The second bucket that I mentioned that I'm really focused on is affordability. And there is a lot in this bucket. There is the fact that we need to stop the tariffs until there is a clear tariff strategy. Tariffs are affecting small businesses because it's very hard as a small business to plan when you are constantly being hit with a new tariff out of nowhere without any coherent strategy. Tariffs are affecting families, diaper costs, toy costs, stroller costs, clothing costs have all gone up by a quarter, 25%. So how do we stop those tariffs? And if you can't stop the tariffs, how does Congress actually provide oversight of the strategy over tariffs when oversight is a huge part of what Congress should be doing to ensure that the president has an actual strategy and isn't just sort of causing chaos as a chaos agent? Then there's the sort of educational bucket of affordability. How do we help families with childcare? Can we provide universal pre-K? Can we make childcare more affordable by capping costs of childcare to be 7% of a family's income? Then there's, of course, the housing bucket of affordability. How do we build more housing to ensure that there's no homelessness, but even beyond that, to ensure that people are not getting paychecks and then still laying awake at night thinking about how they're going to pay for that month's rent or mortgage? And then how do we help a family who wants to be able to take medical leave or family leave when they're having a child, actually have parental leave? How do we strengthen unions with the PRO Act by passing the PRO Act finally to actually make sure that they can collectively bargain for better benefits for themselves? How do we pass the $15 minimum wage, which obviously will help families have a better chance of, being able to afford being alive? So those are some policy ideas in that bucket. And then finally, I mentioned accountability. I think that we have a real trust crisis in this country, and I think that's something that we really need. I love the vigorous head nod. I think that's something that we really need to do as people running for office and as people who are already in office, is think about how we can hold ourselves and our colleagues accountable to rebuild that trust. I think right now a lot of Americans feel like politics isn't for them because they don't see any moral clarity from leaders. And I think that's a very fair criticism. So, a few things that I'm focused on in accountability is campaign finance reform. How do we end Citizens United? How do we get these insane amounts of money out of politics and make sure that people are actually being chosen by the right people? And the right people to me are just normal people. I think we need to really start exploring things like age limits or term limits for Congress members. I think we need to explore things like expanding the House of Representatives, which would actually make the House of Representatives more representative if there are more representatives, and it would also help with campaign finance reform. I think we need to explore ways to bring people into the political process. We used to have a petition process during the Obama years and the first Trump years where people could propose policy and then have a lot of petition signatures in order to organize to have those policies passed. So how can we apply that to Congress? But really just a lot of emphasis on being accessible and accountable to people and making sure that you are a member of the community who is actually representing the people that you're supposed to represent.
On the housing bucket, in Richmond and I think in Henrico, I feel like more every day I'm seeing just like the homeless population grow, like these individuals and families who have already fallen through this safety net that we were supposed to have. And when we're building that safety back up, I can't help but think like these people are already still underneath it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, like, where do you think that, like, how can we bring those people who have already fallen back up?
Yeah, I think building more housing is a huge part of it, right? Building more affordable housing that actually meets the level of demand. I think there's a huge level of demand and a problematic level of supply. So building more housing and getting rid of regulatory tape and holding NIMBYs accountable, frankly, is a huge part of it. I think that's sort of the core of the housing issue. And then I think ancillary to that is If folks feel like they need to be making more money, that is another great tie back to passing a $15 federal minimum wage to make sure that people are actually making a living wage in this country to be able to afford housing. If folks feel like they need job training, right? Maybe they don't have a 4-year degree. 4-year degrees are incredibly expensive, speaking as someone who had hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans. And so there's such an emphasis in this country on 4-year degrees, but why can't we start getting creative on job training and supporting people through job training and having a better pipeline to sort of, that level of middle class wealth? I think that can help as a supportive homelessness crisis if the problem is job creation. But I do think that the core issue is actually making sure that there is housing that is affordable. I see a lot of housing go up, and they're very nice buildings, but I don't actually believe that they're affordable. So really making sure that there's enough housing for people who need it.
Talking more about your working family, you are working to build a family in your belly. You've been very open about your pregnancy throughout your campaign. And to me, I haven't been pregnant yet, but when I do, I imagine that that's going to be enough of a challenge for me. Plus, running for Congress seems like a pretty loaded plate. Especially when women are like seen as probably one of the most vulnerable like people in society. So I'm curious, was there a moment where you reconsidered running, and what was that push that made you say, like, this isn't going to stop me?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So for context, I'm 6 months pregnant, as I mentioned earlier. And I found out that I was pregnant right around the time that I launched my campaign. And this is my first pregnancy, first child. So yeah, definitely a lot going on my end. I never reconsidered running or not running for Congress. If anything, I felt more urgency to run for Congress. Again, lived experience is something really important to me right now. I feel like we have just a ton of politicians and members of Congress who are so far removed from the realities that most Americans face that it is negatively impacting policy that's passed in this country. No man in Congress would ever drive an hour to a hospital for childcare or for healthcare, and they don't have to do that, right? Or else we'd have better policies out of them. Sorry, my dog has come back for a cuddle. I have just felt that being pregnant will, if anything, allow me to be even more empathetic to what working families are going through, and will allow me to be an even greater champion for working families in Congress. Right now, only 7% of Congress members have young kids or are pregnant, and that is just striking. If elected, I would be the youngest mom elected, and I'm 30 years old. I'd be 31 when elected. So no, I never doubted it. I never waffled on it, but I, if anything, feel more urgency and clarity about why we need to actually elect people who live these things to pass legislation on these things.
Definitely going to come back to the urgency point. But I wanted to talk about, I know you've seen the Telegram pages that were released. Have you seen that? Of the president of the New York Republican Youth. Yes. Oh my gosh. And all of the...
I thought it was Telegram, so I was like, what are the Telegram pages? Yes, the racist text. Yes, the porn text.
And some of them were, like, had party-related positions or currently holding them. And I just wanted to know, like, what you think about these messages getting released and, like, the normalization of these so extreme views. And, like, do they get a pass because they're young, like J.D. Vance says?
I just can't say that I'm surprised, right? Like, when we have our president saying things that our president says very frequently, and, like, our president also has openly talked about not wanting to unify the country. And so this language isn't just divisive, it's really hateful, but I really genuinely cannot say that I'm unfortunately surprised when that is really what some members of the Republican Party really stand on in this country. I feel like I've seen some accountability. I feel like I've seen some of these people step down from their positions, but I find it absurd and not shocking. And I find the situation that we're in this country to be abhorrent and divisive and polarized. And I really feel like we need to start electing people to fill the vacuum of leadership. Like, we just have a real lack of leaders in this country who have the values that we need to show as good values to get this country back on track. So I think it's hateful and insane, and I'm glad that there's a level of accountability for it and that they were released.
I think that it was hard for me because I guess I was really surprised when I saw it. Like, I know that, I don't know, I guess like if they were regular college dudes or 25-year-old dudes that were doing it, then I wouldn't be surprised. But it's like, if you're going to be someone that wants to make a change, like in our politics, and you have such disgusting views, it's like, and those are only the, like, it makes me scared because it's like, those are only the idiots that like sat and write it down and to send it. You know, like, how many people do we know that just think that way and are influencing the things that we're doing?
I think the fact that, you know, I am seeing a lot of people speak out about, even the fact that we're talking about it right now, and I am seeing a lot of people speak out about it, is the best antidote, right? Like, it's not that it's being normalized. This language has already been normalized, right? Like, it just simply, unfortunately, has been normalized. And these are issues that have plagued this country since its creation. But I think the fact that we can call it out and very clearly have a week-long conversation about it online and in real life is actually a sign that it's not okay. And that there is accountability around the fact that some of these people have had to resign from their positions is some glimmer of hope. But yeah, it is wild. It is simply wild.
Talking more about what is online in media, I feel like censorship in media has only grown. Especially with like the hiring and firing of Jimmy Kimmel, this line between responsible moderation and then the, like, suppression of public opinion has blurred. And it has me thinking about like media bias. Can also, like, Landon will talk about like how some news outlets won't want to post certain things for like targets on their back. And as someone who has worked in tech and media, like, what is your diagnosis of how media has changed when it comes to covering the Trump administration or just any plethora of these issues?
I think generally the second Trump administration has been strikingly different from the first Trump administration. That sounds like an obvious statement, but the real reason I think it's been so different is because of the reaction from corporations and the reaction from a lot of really powerful people to the second Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, a lot of powerful people, including corporations, were sort of members of the resistance. I think it was very trendy to fight back. And in the second Trump administration, I'm seeing a lot of bending of the knee in fear of retaliation or in hopes of a business opportunity. And so, you know, these are all things that are on track to really make us an autocracy. We are seeing the president sort of consolidate a lot of power for himself. And that may sound like a sweeping, dramatic statement, but I think it actually comes across in really simple ways that we're seeing every single day play out. So you mentioned Jimmy Kimmel. The silencing of comedians and taking them off airs is literally a tenet of how you move from a democracy to an autocracy. We're seeing people like Mark Benioff, who's the CEO of Salesforce, which is an enormous company in America, obviously, who was a Democrat, who donated a lot to Hillary Clinton, now talk about how he is very pro-Trump and how the National Guard should come to San Francisco. So there's two things there. There's corporations bending the knee in hopes of trying to garner attention. And there's also this like intense, new and recent push for the militarization against our own citizens, which is a core tenet of autocracy. So those are like some very intense things that I'm seeing that's very different this time around from Trump 1.0. And then, you know, of course, there is the attack on media. And I worked in media during the first Trump administration. And I can tell you that the Trump administration then attacked the media a ton. I was there when my colleagues were accused of treason by the president. But now in this Trump administration, it's not that the attacks on media are new or different, it's that they have new teeth, right? So not only is he attacking them on Truth Social, attacking them on social media, having his bully pulpit to attack them, but now he's really going after them with fines, just millions and billions of dollars of fines that can bankrupt them or make them feel like at a time when media already has a difficult business model, that they have to figure out ways to sort of, again, bend the knee in fear of retaliation to Trump. That being said, I actually do feel quite good about a lot of the media, whether it's, your media or whether it's sort of national media, still feeling passionately about their mission of sort of holding the powerful accountable. So I still see a lot of that, but it is definitely a very intense climate. And I definitely see a lot of corporate partners in particular sort of willfully bending the knee to the Trump administration, whether there's an opportunity for business there or whether it's because they're just scared of having the Trump administration go after them.
Where do you think that meaningful change in our democracy will end up coming from, or more likely to come from? Is it from these institutions like Congress or like big media outlets like CNN, or is it from these outside voices like, some of the interviews we do with like Joe Ellis, who was like a trans pilot who was fired?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination. I don't, the media reports on things. I think we're in a real point of checks and balances falling to people more than anything. I think a lot of the time people think of checks and balances as something that comes from the three branches of government, but I think we're really at a point where checks and balances is falling to people. And I think we have a pretty fragmented media ecosystem. And what I mean by that is, 10, 15 years ago, everyone got their news from similar enough places, not the same places, but similar enough places, mostly on TV. And now you can get your news from two influencers on TikTok, which is different from the two influencers that I get my news from on Instagram, which is different from the two influencers that someone else gets on Twitter, which is different from, Twitch, which is different from YouTube, which is different from podcasts, which is different from every other thing that I'm missing, right? And so that is just a very different ecosystem. And so to me, it's less about like, is CNN going to help us through, and more about how can we get as many people as possible who are coherent, responsible thinkers, who are also innovative thinkers, to be talking about what this country needs to move forward and get back onto a better track, talking in all of these places. How can we talk to one another non-judgmentally? I think non-judgmentally is really important. Non-judgmentally about what this country needs to focus on and how what we are experiencing day to day is not it. And so I think it's a real question of quantity and quality. How can we get as many people as possible who are normal people talking about this, whether they're running for office or whether they have had another lived experience that makes them like a relevant messenger. So I really think the power is falling to people. I just do not see it coming as much from the institutions that we're formerly used to it coming from. Moving
on to your take on immigration, and still another thing that I resonate with just because my family's from Spain, my grandfather's from the Philippines, and all throughout Richmond there are people that are all over the world. I work with some people who are from Mexico, and yet, for years we've acknowledged that there has been an outdated immigration system and has failed to make a immigration reform. I think the last time they tried to do it was 2013, and then it just stopped at the House. And yet the political conversation about immigration has only been fired up. And to me, this issue has only really started to become radicalized since Trump's first administration. And I don't know how to stop this rhetoric that all immigrants are criminals. So I just wanted to ask you, how can we stop the public's opinion from being so hateful towards these people that used to be what the American dream was all these people coming together from different places?
Yeah, I mean, America is a country built by immigrants, literally and figuratively. I think what I have been seeing this year, so of course, the president campaigned last year on deporting criminals. And what we are seeing this year is that many of the people who are being detained and deported by ICE are not criminals. They are members of our community. They are people that They are small business owners. They are small business workers. They are teachers. They are care workers. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people in both parties find that problematic. I'm seeing a lot of people, even in the Republican Party, say that they were sold a false thing, right? They were told that only immigrant or only criminals would be deported, and now it's just sort of a mass deportation going on. And something that gives me hope is that that's not what people want. That's not what people in either party want. And so I think for me, the important thing is making sure that Americans on both sides of the aisle understand that immigrants are crucial to our economy and crucial to our communities, and understand that it's going to come for you. Like, if this continues, it'll come for you in the form of, it'll be your friend, it'll be your neighbor. It's not just going to be happening states away from you. And you're going to see people that you love and respect and know impacted. And I do think that is resonating for people. But that is the main way that I think that this conversation changes.
You've warned that autocracy slips in when, well, we're looking the other way. And I find that is truest among my generation and my peers, that it's just the young voters and are just politically disengaged, and I feel frustrated and disillusioned with like this whole big scary world of issues, and it feels like it's been that way since I was a kid. Can you maybe shine some light, being the president of the Young Democrats of Henrico? Like, what would you say to young people and people that are pulling away, for why they should be urgent and why we need to act now?
Yeah. I mean, I think of young people in the same way that I think of a lot of voters or a lot of Americans who just feel removed from the political process. And that is that Democrats in particular are really good at talking to hyper engaged voters who vote every single election cycle and like know everything about when election day is, know where their polling site is, etc. That's not a lot of the country. So Democrats are losing a real opportunity to talk to people who make up the majority of the country. And so, what I would say first for Democrats, and then I'll get to the young people part. Democrats running for office and Democrats who are not running for office, but just engaged members of their party who want to see it succeed because they believe in the democratic values, need to start meeting people where they are. I think this is a huge part of why Democrats lost in 2024. And what I mean by meeting people where they are is go on Twitch, go to a football game and talk about it, talk about politics, go to a happy hour and talk about politics. Do not show up with a 25-point policy plan that is very professorial, that is going to bore someone to death. Just make talking about politics a part of culture. I think, unfortunately, that's something that Republicans figured out, and I think Democrats are slowly figuring it out. But as I mentioned earlier in this conversation, a lot of our media is fragmented. We just have a lot of channels, and young people and Americans of all kinds can just choose to opt out of politics, and we need to get them to care about politics, because politics affects all of us, whether you're 18 or whether you're 75, right? Climate change is a huge issue that's going to affect all generations, especially the younger generations who will be stuck with cleaning it up. But so will immigration, so will affordability. If you're buying something on Shein, your costs for Shein have gone up exponentially because of the tariffs, right? So it's just everything in politics affects you very urgently. And so I think the actual onus, though, is on Democrats who are running for office and Democrats who are in office to find ways to meet voters where they are, and for Democrats to become a part of culture. So I would really urge folks to, go on podcasts, go on Twitch, go on streaming platforms, and find ways to really make politics a part of the everyday that feels very tangible. I was the Metro Richmond area Young Democrats president, and we saw a lot of success with that. We would have, Super Bowl pre-games. We would have NASCAR race pre-games and tickets. And the point of that was just attracting people for the sake of just being a community. I think there's a real lack of community in this country, and a lot of people are feeling it. And then, as part of that, being able to talk about politics, but really focusing on forging stronger bonds with people to be able to talk about politics.
And on that, if elected, you'll be coming into a district that traditionally leaned Republican. And I agree that keeping this openness to the other side is the only way that we could come together. What shared values do you think transcend party lines, and how will you speak to the other side?
Yeah, I think that everyone is human at the end of the day, and talking to people in really respectful and human ways without judgment is core to a winning strategy. I was raised by, again, housekeeper mom who was a nanny from Russia. A lot of Russians are quite conservative, and my stepdad is a retired cop. So a lot of people who identify as independents or even Republicans have the same profiles as my parents did. So I have learned a lot in my personal life about how to sort of be able to talk about complicated issues with people who may not entirely agree with you, but to find a balance there. I think at the end of the day, though, what transcends party lines is people feeling like you are going to show up for them. And something that has been really important to me in my campaign already is showing up for people, right? Like, we are 1 year out from election day in my campaign, and I launched something called the Lisa Listens Tour, where I've gone to all 18 parts of the district. It's a very large district, like hour minimum drive everywhere. And the point of that is I'm showing up, I'm willing to be accessible, I'm willing to be accountable. I will take any question you want to ask, whether it's difficult or a softball. And I find that just transcends all politics, because people want no bullshit. They just want you to be able to take a tough question, whether you can, completely agree with them or not is a different question, but they just want to see someone who is willing to hold themselves accountable. And that's another thing that I think is really resonant for folks. So lack of judgment, and also just being able to show that you have a spine and will show up for them, I think is really important.
I have one more question that is pretty easy. Just what is one thing you want people to remember and about you and why you're running and the changes that you want to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really believe that we need to elect more members of Congress who have the lived experience that most Americans have. And I have that experience, whether it's growing up relying on programs like Medicaid and public schools and free lunch programs, or whether it's being a new generation of leader who has the energy and the vigor to actually want to do things differently and to actually want to solve problems. And I think that's what we need in Congress now. And I'd really like to hold myself accountable. I'd really like to hold my colleagues accountable. And I'd really like to actually get things done and problem solve in order to have Americans believe that government can work for them.
Check out more from RVA Magazine at rvamag.com. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter and check us out on Instagram and Reddit. This is Landon Schroeder for RVA Magazine. Talk soon. Silence outside, I think it's